It's time that communities stop treating cannabis businesses differently than other businesses that sell alcohol or tobacco or pharmaceuticals. Each of those types of businesses probably have more community impacts than cannabis operations.
Hello and welcome to Different Leaf, a show for new and experienced cannabis consumers. I'm Brit Smith. In just about every state where weed is legal, entrepreneurs hoping to get into the cannabis industry have to jump over a ton of hurdles before they're allowed to open up shop. In Massachusetts, it's especially difficult and can cost millions of dollars just to apply to start a marijuana company. One of the rules here is that potential cannabis business owners must also agree to a host community agreement with the town or city that they want to be in. There's also a policy that says cannabis companies may also pay community impact fees of no more than 3% of gross sales to their town for up to 5 years. Now, these fees are meant to offset any costs to the city that can be reasonably related to the cannabis company's operations, like an increased need for police or health services. But the policy essentially gives local lawmakers enormous leverage to tax the living daylights out of pot shop owners for problems that they may not really be causing. Some towns like Lee, Northampton, and recently Amesbury have done away with the pot industry's impact fees altogether because, as the chairman of the Cannabis Control Commission, Steve Hoffman, said, quote, "There haven't been increases in youth consumption or crime or hospital admissions." And as you may have heard in our recent episode with Dan Adams of the Boston Globe, there's been a bit of a revolution going on among some of the state's smaller cannabis business owners. Those entrepreneurs say that their town's leaders are simply charging cannabis companies the maximum amount allowed because they can, without itemizing or proving that those reported impacts are in fact because of the cannabis companies. Today's guest is Caroline Pineau, owner of STEM Adult Use Cannabis Dispensary in Haverhill, Massachusetts. Caroline is not just an entrepreneur, she's also truly a pioneer. She is the first person in the state who is pushing back on the industry's community impact fees in court. Caroline is currently in a legal battle with the City of Haverhill over nearly $500,000 that local government is trying to charge her for the apparent impact her store has had on the city. In fact, altogether, Haverhill is trying to charge its 3 pot shops around $1.3 million in impact fees, and more than $800,000 of that would be earmarked strictly for the police department. However, Caroline says the city's leaders have failed to explain exactly what reasonably related impact her shop has had that would prompt it to have to pay that exact amount. You're from Massachusetts, I can hear that.
I'm born and raised in Maine. I might have picked up a little bit of the Massachusetts accent from my husband, who's from this area, but I've been here for about 12 years now.
Okay, cool. I recently went up to Maine, up to Portland. I didn't realize how very different a culture Maine is to almost like the rest of New England.
Oh, yeah. It's got its own thing going on.
It's beautiful up there, though.
It is.
So you moved down to north of Boston, right? That's where.
Yeah. So I went to school in South Carolina, actually, and then moved up here for my first job out of college.
And what were you doing when you first came back up here?
I worked for a sports technology company. They did video editing software for collegiate and professional sports teams. So I traveled a lot and did marketing and event coordination for them.
So how do you move from that into cannabis?
Well, I moved very quickly from that job and I ended up opening a yoga studio in Haverhill where I live now. And I owned that for almost 10 years. Very entrepreneurial person at heart. Really wanted to be a first mover in the cannabis space. Definitely a cannabis consumer and cannabis lover myself, and also someone who cares a lot about my community. And I saw a tremendous opportunity as someone who lived in the community and previously owned a business in the community to really be an exciting opportunity to introduce cannabis to Haverhill.
This was like 2016 when it legalized out. No, that's when the vote was, right? It was 2016.
Yes.
Yep. And so it didn't actually start. Nothing really kicked off in the legal market in Massachusetts until 2017, right?
Right. And you didn't see a lot of shops opening till that time and later. We were the 42nd shop to open in the state. We opened in the height of the pandemic in May of 2020. So we've been open about a year
Wow.
and a half now, and it's been such a blast.
And you were the 42nd shop, and that was just over a year ago. And now we've got more than like 170 shops. So
Yes,
it's really exploded in the last year, right?
it has exploded, and you can definitely sense a shift in the market already. It's a lot more competitive than when we first opened, but it keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, for sure. There's not just those pot retailers, there's also, the manufacturers, the cultivators. All in all, there's more than 300 cannabis companies in Massachusetts in some form. Every single one of them, before they open, has to go through this huge, long process, which is different to every other state's process of opening up cannabis businesses. Can
Yes.
you tell me what it was like from like day one of I want to open a retail shop up until you actually got the license to open?
Sure. So we applied for what is called an economic empowerment license. There's 120 economic empowerment licensees in the state of Massachusetts, and it was a 2-week window back in April of 2018. You had to apply. You had to qualify for a number of criteria in order to be designated by the state as an economic empowerment social equity applicant. And we were grateful to have received that. So once we were notified in mid-May that we had been accepted as an economic empowerment licensee, which means we were from an area of disproportionately harmed community by the war on drugs.
Mhm.
And the idea in the legislation is really to give people in those communities a chance to economically revitalize the community. So once we got that designation, we really hit the ground running. The hardest part was property acquisition and
Mm.
the municipal political dance that you had to play with City Hall here in Haverhill and the zoning component of everything.
Let me ask you more about that. So before you even apply for your license, you have to have some form of a host community agreement in place, which is basically an agreement between who would become the business and the town or the city, the municipality that they want to open in. What was it like for you to try and get on the same page as the City of Haverhill?
It was very difficult and has remained difficult to this day. I knew that I wanted to open in downtown Haverhill. It was important to me that cannabis be accessible and it be safe and it be normalized in our community. So I wanted to be right on the main street. So I worked with city councilors. A lot of education was required of what actually a legal cannabis operation would look like and feel like in our community. And I had a ton of public support from my pre-existing yoga studio. So people came to meetings to support me, but it was a lot of education. And we had to get the city of Haverhill to agree to a host community agreement. And you can't do that until you have a property secured either outright as an owner or a lease on a property. So it's kind of a jigsaw puzzle of how you
Hmm.
accomplish all of those things simultaneously.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of stuff you have to do to prep yourself to be eligible to apply for the license.
Right. And even when you're ready to go, they might not be ready to go. And so it's a hurry up and wait type of situation.
And how much does it cost you to just apply for a license in Mass?
Including the total investment from start to finish, we spent about $1.2 million to get our operation up and running.
And of course, because that's for a federally illegal substance, banks won't touch you. So you have to obviously get a lot of investors involved in that. What was that process like for you to try and get that money together?
Right. So it was stressful because we started with family investment and we were nervous that the family investment would not last us. So we did actually go through quite a bit of due diligence with potential investors. We eked it out at the end. We maxed out all our credit cards, put everything on hold personally so that we could get this business up and running. And we were able to do it with just our family's investment. So that was great. My father ended up purchasing the property, which was a huge help. And we are proud to be 100% independently owned and operated.
What did it take for you on a personal level? How much energy, how much time, how much research did you have to put into it before you even opened your doors?
It was 2+ years before we opened our doors, and it was all I did all day, every day. And when I opened, I actually thought we were going to get open way before we did, as I think many people do. And you just keep facing delay after delay after delay, so many things out of your control. And so when we opened, I was actually 9 months pregnant.
Wow.
That was a pretty surreal experience.
Oh my gosh.
But something I will never forget.
As of May 2020,
yes,
you guys opened your doors in Haverhill, which is up near the border of Massachusetts and New Hampshire.
Yes.
For folks that aren't from this area, the cities up there of Haverhill, Lawrence, Methuen, they are hard hit by meth, fentanyl, and other opioid addictions. What did it mean to you to be able to bring cannabis to that community?
Oh, it was so important. This community is incredible. And being able to bring safe, tested, legal cannabis to a community where there already is cannabis was exhilarating. And to be able to provide the positive impact in our community through legal cannabis sales, the tax revenue for the city, and just the overall education for our community of how legal cannabis can help people with opiate addictions and help minimize crime, that educational piece and being able to get people to understand why it's so important to embrace a legal market was so much of the fun for me, and getting the community on board, because it's very much a community retail business that we have here right in downtown.
So now I want to move on to what it took after you'd opened the doors to STEM to keep the doors open. Because it's not just the process before you start a business here in Mass. There's also an ongoing process that you have to give back to the town, to the community. Can you talk through what it looks like for you guys to remain open?
Yes. So when we opened, we were the first to open in this whole geographic area. And all of the towns to the west of us actually have banned cannabis, with the exception of Lowell. So between here and Lowell, there were no legal cannabis stores. So it was a really great opportunity for us to be a first mover in our area. And it wasn't like when some of the first shops in the state open where you see lines wrapped around the street, but it was exciting enough that we got definitely a boost of enthusiastic cannabis fans that came through the door, whether they be recreational consumers or medical patients that just appreciated the product selection that we had. And we really made it our mission to make cannabis accessible and to make shopping for legal cannabis feel comfortable, like you were talking to one of our staff for the first time and just getting to understand about it, because so many people had never bought weed legally before. And what an amazing opportunity to be the first ones to get to do that with someone.
And there happens to be, involved in the host community agreement after you've opened, a couple of paragraphs that stipulate that anybody who has a cannabis business has to give back to their community through impact fees and a 3% local tax. And then you've also got to do something for the community. What was it that you guys did for that route?
So as a part of the statewide application process, each cannabis operation needs to have a plan for positive impact. So this is something that we developed over the course of 2 years during our application process and refined. Because of my pre-existing relationships in the community, we had wonderful partnerships already existing that we were able to really develop. And we partner with so many wonderful organizations, work with children, homeless, veterans organizations, arts community, cleaning up the downtown. And we, in our first couple of years of operation, have over 150 hours of community service and have donated more than $80,000 in charitable contributions, voluntary charitable contributions. And these are things outside of our host community agreement. The host community agreement also says that in addition to the 3% sales tax, which our customers pay at the point of sale, that we are obligated as a operator in the city to reimburse the city for up to 3% of our gross revenue for reasonably related mitigation costs. So, say for instance, the City of Haverhill needed to hire a police officer to be in front of our shop, which they have not. We would reimburse the city up to 3% of our gross revenue for any fees that they incurred, so long as they were reasonably related to our establishment.